We have finally proven, that it is more costly to keep people in the state of homelessness than it is to either prevent it or end it for them.
Democratic Visions is handmade in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka by DFL Senate District 42.
In the early 80s, when we first started seeing people sleeping in church doorways and on the church properties, and people really thought it was going to be some temporary issue, and so churches opened up all over the community, as you know, to provide these temporary shelters. And many of those shelters still exist because 25 years later, as you said, folks are still around. I do think that so many people think that homelessness has always been a major issue in urban communities around the country, and really it's not. It hasn't been since the early 80s that we've seen the kind of homelessness that we're seeing today. So I find that a little hopeful in that, if it hasn't always been at the level it is now, then that probably means it doesn't always have to be, and there's something we can do about it. So so we'll talk more about some of those solutions later, but
I think there were some kind of cataclysmic events that all came together at the same time to produce what we now know as this homeless population. The deinstitutionalization policies added significantly to this population. I'd like you to talk more about that. I think that our policies around prison reform or lack thereof has contributed to this population mightily. Prior to the 1980s, we had Skid Row. And while as nefarious as Skid Row might have been, it was 8,000 housing units.
It was a cheap place to live. And then urban renewal took over and renewed cities all over the country, and we lost almost all of those really cheap rooming houses. So that very much contributed to it as well.
Who do you see as today's population?
Well, we know right now, for example, that 70% of all of our homeless youth have come out of foster care or juvenile justice systems. 70%. So, for me, that screams that there's a huge opportunity there, because that's my job, is to try to find opportunities to actually prevent and end homelessness. But if we could get with those kids earlier, connect with them, and make sure that they don't leave foster care to the streets or to a shelter, then I think we're going to make great strides. But until we do that, we can work up here all we want and try to get people into housing, but people are going to keep coming into the system unless we close the front door, so to speak, and make sure that they're not becoming homeless in the first place. Same with corrections, as you mentioned. We have, it's an enormous number of people every year who enter Hennepin County without safe and stable housing from both state corrections and county corrections, because we don't do the discharge planning, So people walk out they've done their time, they're ready to come back to the community, and they say, okay, good luck, see you. And they don't have the housing, they don't have the resources, they don't have the family supports. So of course they end up in our homeless system.
I think the taxpayer would be somewhat surprised to know that it costs between $35,000 and $40,000 a year to maintain someone in Stillwater Prison, as an example. And when there is not discharge planning, they become part of this burgeoning homeless population. And things are so difficult for this group that nobody will house them and nobody will hire them.
Right. Yeah, the whole cost piece has been really interesting. I think that we're now a part of this national movement around the country to end homelessness. And people ask me all the time, why is it getting so much attention? Why are elected officials now kind of at the state level and the local level and the national level all talking about this? And I think it's, hands down, the cost issue. We have finally proven, that it is more costly to keep people in the state of homelessness than it is to either prevent it or end it for them. This recent example in Hennepin County, which I think is really interesting, is that we did data analysis of the folks who are the highest users of our jail and shelter systems. And we took all the data of people who've been in shelter 4 or more times in the past 5 years, including a recent 2006 stay, so we knew they were recent folks. And then we looked at a list of people who've been in jail 4 or more times in the past 5 years, including a 2006 stay. We compared those two lists, and there were 266 people who were on both of those lists.
Certainly.
266 people. Those 266 people used 70,000 stays of jail, shelter, and detox in 5 years, costing Hennepin County over $4.2 million. So we spent $4.2 million with no results because they're still cycling through the system. And so the idea that we could break those cycles and actually get people housed instead of using jail and shelter as housing, the cost effectiveness of that is just enormous.
Democratic Visions is handmade in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka by DFL Senate District 42. Norbert Gurnis, Chair. Democratic Visions can also be seen on our website, dflsd42.org.